I was hired as a personal assistant to Marshall Chess, who was hired me before they came to the States. And I was supposed to work for him, but the minute they arrived in the States, that went. And I never saw Marshall again after that, I think. So I became a personal assistant to the whole band, but the whole band pretty much was spending most of the time with Mick. So as they would come into town, I would always do things for them. When the tour started, I wasn't part of the tour. I wasn't on the itinerary. I didn't have a room. I was staying back in LA, sadly. And, you know, I think Mick asked me, why aren't you going? And it's like, now, this is his tour, right? And I said, well, because there's no need for me there. There's no place. So what he did after about a week or two is he found a way to get me involved. He would call me from the road and we'd talk. And one day he called up and said, could you go to the airport, pick up the Ozzie Clark jumpsuits that are being sent there and fly them to Chicago? And it was like, yeah, okay, I can do that. So once I got out there, then I was there. But during the tour, predominantly I was working for Mick and Keith. I had never been on a tour before. I'd been on a Stones tour as a visitor, and I was oblivious to what anybody was doing. But this was the first tour where I was aware of all the work. It didn't affect me because I pretty much stayed. I mean, Mick would call me up and say, can you come pick up my cleaning and turn it in the morning or turn it in tonight? And Keith would say, do you want to come down and get high? And, you know, or they'd say, could you fly to New York and get my camera fixed? That was my job. That's a major deal because they'd already contacted the company that made the camera. Well, I don't know what it was at that time, you know, Minolta, I don't know. But anyway, I take a car, go out to the big factory, they take care of the camera, and I get back on a plane. And it's just like, oh my God, life is really easy when you're famous, you know, everything just happens. And when I got back to Indianapolis, I flew into Indianapolis, I got a taxi or a limo or something, and Mick was, you know, I remember everybody was pretty messed up, but he was like, he was jogging. You know, getting rid of the energy that he had after the show. And I remember thinking, at that time, it just, even though I knew how he was, I think it maybe was the first time I realized how much he stays physically fit during a tour. That was a pretty impressive moment for me. But what I was seeing, and what I understand better today, is how hard the work was for the people who were really doing it, like, you know, Peter Rudge, Joe Bergman, and Alan Dunn. Later, as I became a tour manager, I felt sorry for them, and I felt some regret that I hadn't been more aware of it at that time, because it was hard work. I mean, we had meeting after meeting about getting rid of people because the tour just kept getting bigger and bigger. And, you know, I was the extra weight, and at one point left the tour because I thought, because the people who were running it weren't real pleased with us extra, you know, us fringe people, and it made it very uncomfortable. So I left. I said, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to be on the tour anymore. I'm going back to LA. And after a few days, Keith called me and said, why aren't you here? And I said, I don't have a need to be there. And he said, yes, you do. Get back on a plane and come out. And I did. But, so I couldn't even escape it. But it was politically a really difficult tour to be involved in if you weren't one of the Stones. Today I look back and go, I get that. There's nothing worse than a lot of friends hanging out on a tour. And that's what in fact, my t-shirt from the tour said, Chris, the friend. Cocksucker Blues, the first time I saw it, I wanted to, it was so depressing. I remember I went to someone's house who had a video of it, because it was not released, if I recall. And I just went, oh my God, this is so depressing. Many things were staged. Example, the orgy on the plane was pretty much set up, but it was also real. And I remember the discomfort of that. It was just like, it was set up for the film. It probably would never have happened otherwise. But the thing is, it happened. So, and you know, there were scenes, I think there were scenes in it, I can't remember, where, you know, being in Keith's room and ordering food, or, you know, everybody sitting around doing drugs and everything. They really happened, but they got set up a bit for the camera. So I think even though there were things set up, they went in line with what the tour was like to a large degree. Cocksucker Blues looked really gray, really dark. I don't remember the tour feeling like that particularly. But also we have to remember that Robert Frank hung out with Keith a lot, and Bobby Keys, and people who were kind of, I mean, Robert Frank is a photographer who takes, if you look at his photographs, many of them were on the back of Exile on Main Street. I mean, he likes odd people. He likes the darker side of life. And so he was drawn to that with the film, I think, where there were things going on that weren't like that. You know, people were not all down. And so to me, the tour had moments where it was pretty awful, I thought, personally. But it was because of just being on the road and being with such a large group of people for a long time. I mean, for 1 month, you're with the same people all the time. I remember, this was one of the memories I had as Terry Southern, the writer. One of my favorite memories was in New Orleans. We had Truman Capote there and Princess Lee Radziwill, and everybody was, you know, it was the middle of the tour and it was time to go to the show, and we went down to meet in the lobby to get in the limos. And Terry Southern had his bag with him and his clothes were hanging out of his bag. And I said, "Why do you have your bag?" And he said, "We have a plane to catch." And I thought, well, that really tells, we didn't have a plane till the next day, but people got so confused about what we were doing. And if they were using, it got worse.